Hello, I'm Aaron Wightman.
And I'm Adam Wild. We're your hosts and co-directors of the Cornell Maple Program. You're listening to Sweet Talk, all things maple. Well, Aaron, it's great to be able to put together this podcast and provide maple production information in a brand new format.
Our goal for this series is to keep you up to date on industry research and innovations. We'll also be sharing unique perspectives from maple producers and others with industry connections. For today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about who we are and why we're interested in maple.
Yeah, it sounds like a great place to start our first episode here. So for the maple producers who may not be as familiar, can you explain to us a little bit more about, let's start with what is the Cornell Maple Program?
Yeah, so the Cornell Maple Program is a research and extension program at Cornell University, and we provide assistance and education to people from all across the maple industry. And what we're trying to do is provide innovative research results and sustainably grow the industry while also transferring that knowledge to maple producers.
Yeah, it'll be neat to be able to spend this time throughout the podcast sharing some of that research that we've done and to bring in other researchers and maple experts. What's kind of unique about the Cornell Maple Program is that we actually have two distinct and unique maple research operations. So we have the Uihlein Maple Research Forest up in Lake Placid, New York, which is in the Adirondacks, a northern kind of cold climate forest. That's where I'm stationed. And we've got 350 acres there. And currently I'm tapping about 6,500 maple trees, plus I have about 500 birch trees where you get to play around and experiment with making birch syrup as well. So that gives us kind of a unique opportunity in this northern forest to mimic what our northern maple producers who have similar type of forest, so we can relate that information. And then we also have the Arnot Forest where you're located, right, Aaron?
That's right. So the Arnot Forest is Cornell's main teaching and research forest, and it's also home to Cornell's 7,500 tap research sugar bush. And it's in central New York, just south of Ithaca, just south of the Cornell University campus. And it's also the location of the future Arnot Maple Laboratory, which is currently under construction. So when that's complete, the new laboratory will feature two identical syrup production systems. So it will have two identical evaporators and reverse osmosis systems. And the purpose of that will be to conduct controlled syrup production experiments. And in addition to that, we'll also have a 20C licensed research kitchen. So we'll be able to do a lot of new products research in that facility. So Adam, how did you get interested in the maple syrup industry?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, the maple is a unique world that's not a huge industry. So getting involved with that is a little bit different. And so I did not actually grow up as a maple producer. I went to undergrad for plant science, and while I was in undergrad, I learned a little bit more about maple syrup production, more about the sap flow and sap sweetness, and it really kind of piqued my interest and started thinking about, and I was at the time was getting really interested in forests and forest ecology. So I ended up going on to grad school and turned my graduate research work into how sap sweetness is controlled within maple trees, and that really just kind of allowed me to dive right into the maple industry. So it's kind of a roundabout way, but it definitely got me there. So what kind of brought you to the maple industry, Aaron?
Well, my interests go back to my childhood in Western New York, where we always had an active sugar bush. At times we hung buckets, and other times we actually put up tubing, usually 80 to 200 taps as I was growing up. And it was something I always enjoyed. But as I moved out into the world and started my career, I sort of forgot about maple for a time. And when I reached a point where I was ready for a career change, the job came up at Cornell, and I remembered how much I loved working with maple. But I also recognized it as an opportunity to do work to help develop our rural economies in upstate New York especially. I'm an upstate New Yorker, and I care a lot about these communities around here, and I recognize the need to try to develop more chances for people to make a living and stay here. And I think maple is a great opportunity to do that. So Adam, you mentioned that a lot of your interest comes from your academic background, but growing up, did you have more contact with the woods? Were you an outdoorsy person?
Yeah, I would say growing up, I was definitely an outdoors person. I loved being outside, I loved being in the forest and working outside. A lot of my jobs growing up as a teenager was working on farms. I grew up on a small family farm. We didn't do maple, but we grew vegetables and raised a lot of different livestock for kind of grass-finished meat production. But not the maple. But we did, we grew up, we were a maple family as far as consumption. We only consumed pure maple syrup. And every year we'd usually go to a sugar house and visit a sugar house, or if they had a pancake breakfast, especially. So I was familiar with maple syrup always growing up, and, where it came from and, kind of how it's produced, but not the full intricacies of the actual production and the science behind all of it. And then when I was out of grad school, I actually went and was teaching plant science at SUNY Cobleskill. And with that, I had the opportunity to kind of interact with students and be in the education world, which I think has really helped me where I am working for the Cornell Maple program, where we do a lot of education. And I love just every different aspects of maple production that, we're not just educators, we're not just forest managers, but we're creating a food product, we're marketing, we're teaching, we're fixing machines and doing plumbing. And so there's so many different things that we have to do as maple producers, but also as educators and researchers. So, and it's kind of neat how you came, you grew up in that small maple world. Do you think there was anything that made you have questions when you were younger about how are the ways to do this more efficiently or better?
Yeah, so I've always been someone with a scientific bent. My academic career was in the sciences. I was a biology major and got a graduate degree in forestry. But when I started my career, I actually started out as a field biologist and did a lot of investigating and question asking and looking for patterns. And I bring that curiosity into maple. And that's something that actually my predecessor and former colleague Steve Childs cultivated in our group at the Arnot Forest, was to always question, is there a different way to do things? Or is there another approach? Or how can we think outside of the box and come up with a new solution to a problem? And that's something that you touched on, Adam, that's unique to our jobs, is that we get to do such a wide variety of things during the day. Some of it's mundane, tasks like maintaining roads and plowing roads. But even doing those small tasks, that's informative for us, and it helps us, I think, communicate with maple producers, because those are things other people have to manage in their businesses and in their sugar bushes. And just having that whole experience of actually running a sugar bush, in addition to doing the research and the extension aspect, I think really informs us and helps us communicate with maple producers.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that it's different than maybe what a lot of researchers, they don't always get to practice the application as much as we do. I think it's neat that we've got these large commercial sugar bush operations that we both get to oversee, that we're not just, doing some research on the side on, 5 trees or 50 trees, that, we have these thousands of taps operations. And we're also creating those products and sharing that information and putting it to practice. So it gives us really great world experience that we have the same issues of, a vacuum pump breaks down just like it does for any maple producer.
Right. And we're a hands-on research organization. And I really value that so much. The fact that if the tractor breaks down, I'm under the tractor fixing it. Or if a tree falls on the lines, I'm out there cutting the tree. It's really educational and really informs our view of how the maple industry really works, to be out there doing all these things every day. So I'm curious, Adam, how do you think the maple industry is going to evolve over the next 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the maple industry will continue to grow over the next 10 years. I think, there is still, I think, that push for knowing where your food comes from. So I think the demand among consumers is going to continue to rise. And I think the maple industry will follow through. I hope at least in the future, in the next 10 years, that we see maple being used in more products and breaking away from just a pancake topping, but that it is kind of the ultimate sweetener, that, it's replacing a lot of other sugar sources. Do you have any insights or perspectives on where the maple industry is going to be going in the next 10 years?
Well, I think you're exactly right, Adam. I think the market forces that are at play right now, especially the interest in locally produced, sustainably produced, clean label ingredients, is really strong. And that puts maple in a great position to have sustained growth. And just to dovetail onto what you were just saying about an evolving line of products, I think that's really the key in the future for maple products, diversifying what we're offering. We have been a pancake syrup industry for a long time, but we're on the cusp of changing that. There are so many opportunities to use maple in different ways, as a flavor additive, as a sweetener, as a fermentation substrate, as a product that has beneficial health attributes and beauty products. I think we're really just beginning to crack that open and see how many different ways we can utilize maple. And it just so happens that a lot of those uses are high value uses. So that really conforms to our business model of producing a gourmet or high value product. So we're definitely on the cusp of something big. Maple has grown a lot in the past 15 years, but I think that's just the beginning. New York is producing somewhere in the neighborhood, realistically, of probably about 1 million gallons of syrup per year. I can foresee us being a 3 million gallon per year industry in New York State alone, and foresee similar growth across the industry. On the new product perspective, there are so many different things that we're looking at right now, and I'm excited for all of them. But one in particular that I think might have some really good legs is this idea of maple chocolate. And that's something that we've had some pilot trials with, and we've found really good success. We've made a really delicious product. And I think that as we develop that, we're going to really hit on something big. The chocolate industry is a big industry. People eat somewhere on the order of $200 billion worth of chocolate a year. So if we can tap into that with maple, I think it could be something really big. So I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes. Adam, are there some new products that you'd like to develop?
Some of the new product opportunities, I mean, I'm certainly excited about some of the maple beers, especially some of the specialty type beers. I'm also a big fan of maple sap, just the pure sap. If we can have that to be pasteurized, we're going to be playing around with that in the future of being able to figure out kind of simple methods for bottling sap. Just having that in the spring, that first maple sap is always refreshing. So if we can keep that around for a little bit longer, would definitely be great. Yeah, you mentioned all these different uses of maple syrup. Do you yourself have a favorite use of maple that maybe gets away from the pancake topping?
Yeah, Adam, I use maple syrup in a lot of my cooking. So a lot of my savory dishes feature an element of maple in them. But in a more traditional vein, I start every day with a pot of coffee, 5 or 6 cups, and each one has a really healthy dose of maple syrup. So I'm probably consuming a good squeeze bottle worth of syrup every other day. So I do a lot of sampling, we'll say. How about you, Adam? Do you have some favorite uses of maple syrup?
I mean, as you mentioned, sampling that maple syrup is one of the best parts of our job. But as you also said, I mean, maple is great in so many products, and I love it in just about anything. It's nice to cap off the end of the day with a nice drink like a margarita, and instead of using like an agave syrup, other sweeteners in any mixed drink, it's great to have a little bit of maple syrup in there as well. It brings a unique flavor and great way to sample and use maple syrup.
And just so the audience knows, I have had Adam's maple margarita, and I will say that they are delicious. Adam, can you tell us what kind of projects you're currently working on at the Uihlein Forest in Lake Placid?
Yeah, we've got several new projects that we're getting up and rolling. A neat one that we're working on putting together right now is we're trying to create a real-time data set of maple sap flow and sweetness, and coupled kind of with some weather parameters, such as, what's the temperature, what's the pressure in the atmosphere, what's kind of even the soil temperature around that tree. So we want to be able to create that data and put that online so that's live, so that maple producers can see what are trees doing at the 2 Cornell Maple Research Forests. Is sap flowing? How's it been doing throughout the season? And also looking at our productions of how have they been flowing, or how many gallons per tap are we actually getting. So it'll be neat to be able to provide that real-time data that folks can have, and then also be able to download that and use that for other resources or research as well. So that's kind of neat. So that's just one neat project I've got working on. Is there anything you're cooking up over at the Arnot Forest?
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of research in different categories. We have things happening in different buckets. So our first bucket is research in the woods and trying to maximize tap hole productivity. And this is something that Steve Childs did for many years. He carried on a series of tap hole sanitation treatments every year. And through that work, he established that certain things like bleaching the spout and the drop line, or replacing it with a new spout and drop every year, or check valves and the silver spouts that kill bacteria, that all those things have a certain level of effectiveness. And he established that really well for 5/16 tubing. This year, I'm shifting our focus exclusively to the 3/16 tubing. Since we've figured out how to manage 5/16 pretty well, I'm going to dedicate all my time to trying to solve the 3/16 problem, because what we found is that after 2 years or 3 years, the T fittings start plugging up, And that's a really hard problem to solve other than going out in the woods and replacing those teas every year. So we're testing some antimicrobial teas. We have antimicrobial quarter-inch teas, which with a little bit of work we can force into the line. And so that gives a little bit of a larger aperture and also provides that antimicrobial treatment to hopefully decrease the biofilm buildup. And then the last treatment we're trying with fittings is a quarter-inch tea that's not antimicrobial to see if that will do the trick. And then outside of that, we're going to try some different levels of calcium bleach sanitation. Last year, we tried a 200 parts per million calcium bleach treatment, and that rejuvenated our 3/16 production somewhat, but it didn't bring it back to the level of new lines. So I'm going to try that at a 400 parts per million and a 600 parts per million treatment as well. So that's one thing I'm focusing on in the woods. And outside of that, we're going to be doing a lot of work in our research kitchen. We're doing work to develop maple beer, kombucha, chocolate, hot chocolate, recipes with regular syrup. And then we're also rolling some buddy syrup research into those efforts. So we're going to be trying to find some flavor compatibilities between buddy syrup and some other high value products and see if we can make buddy syrup into something that's actually useful for the industry. So I think that's a really good opportunity for the industry because there is a fair amount of buddy syrup out there that's been stockpiled already, but also a lot of us stop making syrup as soon as the buddy flavors develop. But if we had a good use for that, we could continue producing for maybe another 2 or 3 weeks during the season and get that additional production. So if this pans out and we find good uses for buddy syrup, that really represents an expansion in our productive capacity. Adam, do you have any neat projects that you're currently working on in the woods?
Yeah, one neat project that we have going on right now that we actually started when the leaves came off our trees was actually do a fall tapping project that we're planning to do for the next few years and trying to quantify the total dormant season sap production from our maple trees. So is it potential to tap into that dormant season? Because anytime you've got freezing and thaw cycles, there will be sap flows from a maple tree during the dormant season. So, traditionally we kind of pigeonhole the maple syrup production to that kind of end of winter period, but, there is a lot of freeze thaw cycles in the fall as well. So we're trying to look at, can we get a substantial amount of sap that it makes it worthwhile? But the risk is, what is that going to do to the trees? And what does that also do as far as the tap hole longevity? And so we know that, the tap hole is going to have yeast or bacteria growing in that tap hole that's going to plug up the cells. We're going to have to retap those tap holes to keep them flowing all the way until the leaves come out in May next year. So with retapping, how's that going to impact the long-term sustainability and health of that tree? So that's one thing we're going to be monitoring over the next few years. So it's kind of neat that at the Uihlein Forest, I'm already over a pint of syrup. And I know, Aaron, you're doing kind of the similar project down at the Arnot Forest, and you're actually seeing a lot better results right now, right?
That's right. That's one of the neat things about this project is we're replicating the study at the Arnot Forest. So we have the exact same treatment that Adam has at the Uihlein Forest. And one of the things we're probably going to learn from this study is the differences in productive potential in the fall between regions. As Adam said, he's made about a pint per tap in his woods. I'm already up to close to 0.4 gallons of syrup per tap. We tapped on October 28th, and we're recording this on December 4th, so it hasn't really been all that long. We're pretty early in the season, and I've already made more syrup from those taps than I did on average for my whole sugar bush all of last season. So there's definitely an opportunity, or at least there was this year. So it will be interesting to see how that trend plays out over the 3-year course of the study. And it will also be interesting to cut down some of these trees at the end of 3 years and look at the formation of non-conductive wood and see if this is a sustainable practice.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. And, this, late fall has certainly, I think, been warmer than normal. So that's certainly helped our sap flow. But what's also been neat, especially, with the amount of production that you're getting, is that in the fall, you don't see as high of sap sweetness within the trees. So, we're averaging more around only like 1.3% sugar, but yet the volume is coming in there. We calculate that out into actual finished syrup. So that's kind of a neat aspect to have there as well. Would you recommend at this point, Aaron, for a producer to be able to tap in the fall, or should they hold off?
Right. We're early in this study and we're not making any recommendations, but these observations are interesting. And at the end of 3 years, I think we'll have enough data to help maple producers think about fall tapping a little differently, perhaps. And it may be that it's an opportunity for people in certain regions, or might be that it isn't worthwhile after all. Or we could find that the sustainability issue is a real barrier. We're just not sure yet, but it's really interesting to see these early results.
Yeah, so you got to stay tuned and see where we kind of go with this. But, if we look back at last year or some previous years, is there anything kind of neat that you learned or worked on that you want to share?
One of the fun things we did last year was we played around with different ways to try to move sap more quickly across flat areas or through uphill areas. And one of our goals is to accelerate sap flow without using any additional gasoline or electric powered pumps or anything like that would require infrastructure in the woods. So instead, we took a releaser and modified it so that we were letting some air into the system. And what we did is we combined several lines so that they all consolidated their flow into this releaser. And then when it released, there was a burst of air that went into the line behind it. And the reason we tried to do this is because we have a long, flat section of woods where the sap moves very slowly. So there's a low volume trickling through all these different main lines, and they're out in the sun. So it's a section where the sap could heat up significantly and potentially have some spoilage issues. So by consolidating it into this mechanical releaser in a shady spot, it stays cool. And then when it's released, it's all consolidated and it shoots down the line at about twice the rate. And so it's reaching the sugar house twice as fast, but there's also a bigger mass of cool sap altogether. So it stayed cooler, and that preserved its quality as it made its way to the sugar house. So that was a really simple solution to that problem, and it was a lot of fun to play around with that and look at the different levels of air inlet that we needed to have to get enough air behind each release to keep the sap moving. How about you, Adam? What kind of interesting things were you doing in the woods last season?
Yeah, we had a few different interesting projects. One that I'll just kind of highlight was the last couple of years I've actually been tapping some beech trees and making beech syrup. So it's not fully maple here, but falls in that line of tree syrups and using a lot of the same equipment. We found that we can actually collect sap from beech trees. I found this year was kind of unique. I put out some trees, right, about 10 trees that I put on buckets. And the whole entire season, there was not a drop of sap. So unfortunately, I don't think you can collect beech sap just putting out buckets, but if you do put a vacuum system onto the tubing, I was actually able to gather sap from those trees, and there's still a lot that we need to learn about it, but the sap volume wasn't great. It wasn't as high as what you get from a maple, and the sugar was lower. We averaged around 1%, but it was still able to turn that into a syrup that actually was really good taste. It kind of has a dried raisins and dried pear plum kind of flavor to it, so it's kind of neat. So it's sort of like maple, but a lot more complex than some of those kind of dried fruit and nut notes to it. So I hope to continue to play with that a little bit more in the future and see if it is a viable option to tap all those pesky beech trees that are growing out within our sugar bush that a lot of times we just want to hack down or get out of our way because they're slapping us in the face all the time. So something kind of unique and different to have on top of your maple operation.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting prospect, Adam. We've tapped some beech trees at the Arnot Forest as well. And when I've done that work in the past, I tapped small beech brush sized trees, so 3 inches in diameter and below even. And I used micro spiles so that I was putting a small hole in the tree. And I did that on the premise that those small stems were connected to a large root network. And with having just 9 trees on a lateral line, I was able to fill up a research canister. So I was getting, each time there was a good sap flow, maybe 15 gallons of sap at 1 Brix. So it wasn't a huge amount, but considering the fact that my 9 trees were all in the 3-inch diameter class, it turned out to be a significant quantity of sap from such a small little experimental sugar bush. So yeah, it would be interesting to see over time whether that's something that can be done at a level of commercial viability or not. So yeah, those are fun little side projects. We're maple producers and we're the maple industry, but if we can utilize the same equipment and the same processes to make some other products, I think that's definitely something that could benefit some businesses.
I think some of our newer equipment, like such as reverse osmosis and vacuum, allows us to potentially tap some of these other trees that we maybe couldn't before or wasn't viable. It's, if you're getting 1% sugar from a birch tree or a beech tree, it's not really viable to make that into syrup. But if you've got a reverse osmosis, all of a sudden now I think it is viable. So I think that's why we're seeing some of these newer species, and we kind of get to play with those a little bit.
Right. And that's a good example of how a new technology should allow us to think more broadly about what we do in the woods. And that comes into play too with our fall tapping experiments and with red maple and other scenarios where the traditional thinking would say, that you might not want to tap a tree if it's giving 1% sugar content sap, because that's going to create extra work. But it doesn't really if you have a good reverse osmosis unit, and it might be very much worthwhile to collect sap at 0.8 bricks. So yeah, I think that's one of those areas where we can really think more broadly now that we have these really powerful tools at our disposal.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that the industry certainly has come a long ways. So Aaron, what is your kind of hopes that this podcast is going to provide for the maple industry?
Well, one of the things that has become especially apparent during the COVID pandemic is the importance of communication and bouncing ideas off each other. And I hope with this podcast, we can have conversations where we have enough different perspectives and ideas shared that it helps other people who listen to the podcast kind of think outside the box and apply those ideas in their sugar bush. We weren't able to have a lot of our workshops this year, and we had to cancel our winter conference. And it's too bad that people haven't had that chance to exchange ideas. But I think the podcast can serve in that role somewhat and help people get some of these new ideas and new perspectives that they wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's going to be fun. It'll be different to hear from everybody. And I'm kind of excited to have this. Maybe it's an opportunity that if you're out working in your woods, walking your lines, or tapping trees, you can listen to the podcast, throw it on with some headphones. I like being out in the woods and nature and just listening to the sounds, but sometimes I like to be able to listen to a podcast or some kind of other webinar so I can keep my mind thinking and doing other things besides just focusing on, obviously we want to be focusing on tapping the trees properly, but it's nice to have something else to listen to while you're out there by yourself.
Right. Wire tying. Now that's a good podcast listening activity.
That is probably when I've listened to podcasts the most, is while wire tying.
Right. It's a never ending task. So Adam, do you think as a researcher, you have some perspectives on the sugaring season that are different from the typical maple producer, or are there things that are also the same?
There's definitely things that are the same, but we certainly have a different outlook and perspective on the maple industry, I believe. We're always kind of trying new things, and I think one neat thing about the maple industry is that a lot of maple producers also like to try new things and kind of experiment on their own a little bit. But as maple researchers, we're definitely focusing more on, making sure that we're getting good quality research. So a lot of times we may sacrifice some of the production or efficiency of doing things in order so we can get good quality data that we could then implement into a larger application or share with other producers. So it does change things a little bit for us, and how we're thinking about it and coming up with different ideas and implementing those throughout our forest. But there's a lot of things that are the same. We have these full operations. We have 6,000, 7,000 trees that we have to tap. We have squirrel chew issues as well, and pumps and vacuum loss that we need to maintain. So we have a lot of those same outlooks and thoughts that we wrestle kind of with. We have flavor issues also. We can get ropey syrup, we can get buddy syrup. So any of those same issues that a maple producer has and has to wrestle with throughout the season, we certainly have that. But also putting some of that research and the data collection above production so that we are creating and maintaining our mission for maple syrup production in our Cornell maple program. Do you think it's different from you and your perspective at all, Aaron?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's something that's really important for listeners to know about our operation, is that we've deliberately created systems that accurately represent what commercial maple syrup production systems look like, so that we're experiencing the same issues and same challenges that people are producing in their real commercial sugar bushes. So we're not running laboratory simulations or sterile experiments. I think it's important that we have a real world working environment so we can really understand those challenges. But the difference, as you alluded to, is that we can take risk without consequences. And that's a really powerful thing for us, right? We can We can go out and try things when there's a risk of failure to generate that knowledge to share with maple producers. For example, if there was a new type of spout that supposedly had benefits, but it was an unknown, we could tap 1,000 trees with that spout and get a real world scaled test to see how they produce. And if we produce a little less syrup, we still have other sources of funding to keep our operations going in the form of grants. And that's a risk that maybe a maple producer might not be able to take because they can't risk lowered production. So I think that's one of the most important functions that we have, is to take those risks and generate that information with new technologies and get past the unknowns and the hurdles to adopting new practices. And that's something I really enjoy quite a lot. Adam, is there a particular part of the sugaring season or a particular moment that you enjoy?
Oh boy. I mean, there's so many great aspects, but I mean, probably one of the best is that first syrup that comes off the evaporator at the beginning of the season, sampling that nice, hot, fresh syrup. I think it's just as a reminder for all the work that you've put into, all the clambering through the woods, through snow, falling down hills and sliding around and carrying all that equipment, cutting trees off, fixing squirrel chews. When you taste that first sip of maple syrup right off the hot evaporator, I think that's probably one of the favorite moments of the season for me. What about you?
Oh, that is a tough one to top. That first taste of syrup is definitely exciting. I think there are two other moments that I enjoy quite a lot, and the first is tapping the trees. Just the rhythm of being out in the woods and hearing the drills and the hammers working in the distance. It's a sign of things to come, and I enjoy the anticipation that creates for sap. The other moment that really excites me is turning on that vacuum pump when everything's plugged in for the first time and seeing the sap just rocket into the releaser. That's really a moment of, I guess, adrenaline and seeing the first bit of fruition from all the hard work that goes into the system throughout the rest of the year. But there are so many moments to choose from, so it's a great thing to be involved with. And I think that's why so many people love the idea of maple syrup, even if they're not maple producers themselves. They can imagine those scenes of standing around the evaporator and waiting for that first taste of syrup.
Oh, for sure. Well, Aaron, that seems like a great place to wrap it up for today.
It's been really great talking with you, Adam.
Certainly. Thank you for joining us for Sweet Talk, all things maple with Aaron and Adam. Sweet Talk is produced by the Cornell Maple Program and is made possible from funding from the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. All music was obtained from Blue Dot Sessions. For more information on all things maple, visit cornellmaple.com. Join us next time for more Maple Sweet Talk. Have a sweet day.